Hi, and welcome back to the HE Enable podcast. This is the show all about sharing our experiences of disability, neurodivergence, and long-term health conditions in UK higher education. I'm Kath, and this week I am joined by Sarah H for the purposes of this episode, because you are the second Sarah I've interviewed, but very, very different person. So Sarah is an award-winning learning developer at the University of Manchester Library, we'll continue that Manchester link, and a member of the UK Neurodivergent Library and Information Staff Network, which is the NLISN. She's also part of a growing pool of Manchester staff and students now who have come on the show. It's been so nice to spend time learning about staff experiences at Manchester with Jackie and Katie on the staff side as part of the staff network, but also Kai, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago as a student who just happens to be a postgraduate research student who's also on the staff network. So lots of Manchester staff, and I've honestly been loving it. I never get to deep dive into an institution that I've not been to this much. I love it. And yeah, I can't wait to add your story to it today. I'm really excited to have a chat with Sarah, and I think it is time we get started. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I just realised that I know I know personally everyone who's actually been on the show.
That is so unsurprising to me. It seems very, very tight-knit.
Yeah.
I think when I was interviewing Katie, I mentioned, because it was her ad that I think brought you to me. She advertised the staff network, and she's like, I don't know who they are, but I'll know who they are after this.
I think probably we've just seen each other's names pop up on the staff networks. That's the kind of thing. But it was Kai, did you say, who was on?
Yep.
Yeah. I work with Kai like every week at least.
Oh God, yeah, Kai's on the library team.
Mm-hmm. He's one of our wonderful student team. And I'm working on a project with him at the minute, so we see each other a bit.
Oh, amazing. Maybe we'll cover that later if we've got time. We'll see. So obviously, I know who you are and I know about the networks you're adjacent to. Regular listeners might as well. But for the lay audience, please could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background in higher education?
Of course, yeah. So everyone, I am Sarah Howley. Hi. So I've been in the Teaching, Learning and Students team, or TLS as it's called, in the library for just over 2 years. And I began my role as a learning developer in April last year. So it's quite a large team. There's about 25 people. And if you add the student team, which we do, we work very closely with them, it's about another 25 people. So it's quite big, really. And we create and deliver workshops, online resources, all sorts of other support open to students and staff. And it covers academic skills and library skills, anything that you can teach to any student who's studying anything. It's not subject specific stuff. So being a learning developer, it means that I focus not just on what students learn, but on how they learn. So, inclusive practice is at the heart of it, and it means a lot to me. And I'm particularly interested as well in how playful learning can be used to teach the same things in new ways. And one of my highlights of my time at Manchester actually is attending the Playful Learning Conference a couple of years ago. It was one of the first things I did, and it was just like, it was an immersion in wonderful things that I have since followed up by joining the Playful Learning community of practice at the university, and it's just great, really. So I also teach open knowledge in higher education, which is the library's credit-bearing module of the PG Cert in higher education. So that's what I do there. And then before I came to Manchester, I spent 5 years in a different academic library. So it was a much smaller institution, University Campus Oldham, and it was a really great job. I feel like I got the first taste of what it was like to work in a library, being around academia since I'd been studying. I was really excited to get back into it and help help students. I was no longer a student. And I just felt like I really belonged. And then while I was there, I decided to do my teacher training. So I got my PG Cert in lifelong learning from the University of Huddersfield. But I was able to study that while I was working and actually do my studies at where I worked and do my placement there as well. So it was like a whole combo thing that really helped me do it. In terms of being a student, my first experience of higher education was as an art student at Salford University. So it was a long time ago and I didn't get further than the first year. I know I never finished. I never did, the end of my first year. So I'll say more about that later. But I reapplied to a different uni later after working for a year. I went to MMU, so Manchester Metropolitan University, and I studied English and creative writing for my undergraduate degree, which I absolutely loved. And then I went back and did my master's in library and information management because it had been a dream of mine since as long as I could remember to become a librarian. And I just, I eventually went for it and I went back and did my master's there. And again, I loved it. I had a bit of a break in between and around studying. I've just realised as well that that makes it 4 HEIs in Manchester, in the Greater Manchester area, which is, it's like weird, but I must love Manchester.
I mean, I visit Manchester semi-regularly. I have friends there. I love that place. I've interviewed the chair of the society, Stable Students Network at Manchester Met, Oscar. I've interviewed 2 people from Manchester HEIs. I have a friend who works at a third. I need a connection to one more, and then we're slightly matched.
Yeah. I've got the Manchester Uni bingo card. I am doing pretty well.
I'm not even going to try and compete, to be honest. So obviously we know that you're part of the neurodivergent spaces and the disability spaces in Manchester and the library networks. And I was wondering if you're comfortable saying, when you were a student, I think, because that's what we've written about as well, how did your disability impact your experience of higher education?
Yeah, I'm part of a lot of things now that I was not part of back then. I look back now and I really wish I could hug myself because I thought I had to do everything when I was a student. I had like a learner support plan for something at college, but it was temporary. And I never realised that I could ask for anything like that at university when I went. So even if I'd had one, I didn't really know what to attribute my symptoms to. I didn't have any diagnoses, not even a suspicion of one. It all was like a series of things that I didn't have connected at the time. So I wonder if that might have also limited the support that was on offer. I don't know. It's just a speculation. So, for example, I only started to think that I might be autistic in around 2017. I was told first that I had general anxiety disorder, which I think is really common for late diagnosed women, but it didn't really feel like enough of an explanation. And all this is a long time after I did this initial study. It was before I did my last degree, but I'd already done 2 by then. It took a few years, but I did get my autism diagnosis in 2021 and ADHD in October last year. So I also found out last year that I have a connective tissue disorder, which is called hypermobility spectrum disorder, or it could be hypermobile EDS. We're not really sure. I'm not sure. There seems to be questions about it. These 2 things overlap so much and my symptoms are quite volatile. So it's like, see how it goes and just sort of manage symptoms. I knew none of that as a student, but all of these things, I feel like I can clearly see now how they were there during all of my higher education experiences. I just didn't know it then.
I mean, sometimes some of these conditions can maybe get more pronounced as you get older. I know that some people only see neurodivergent symptoms when they come to uni because they lose all structure, and connective tissue disorders and I guess autoimmune conditions as well can only sometimes come out under stress, and all of a sudden you're being faced with all these problems.
Yeah, I think that that was a big part of my experience going to university because it introduced new things that I wasn't used to. So Salford was a particularly bad time for my mental health. So like many other students, I moved away from home into halls. I was surrounded by strangers that I wanted to make a good impression on. I had sole control of my finances, my diet. I was the only person in charge of my routine. So, it was a huge transition for anyone. But then I also went through a bad breakup during freshers, and I just it felt like I went through my introduction to uni, like my first ever experience of it, feeling like the entire world had changed. There was nothing that was the same. And I feel like really grateful for the couple of close friends that I did make at that time, because I really went into the partying. I was trying to sort of make my way through these challenges, and the only thing I could think to do was just go and have a good time. So it didn't go well. I found it that I soon was just not really going to classes. There was one point where I was sleeping all day and my friends would wake me up when they got home. So I was really low. And at that point, I tried to seek help from the uni GP, but the tablets that he gave me made me feel terrible. They made me feel really sick, and it was just really discombobulating. It was confusing, and I just stopped taking them. But there was no follow up. There was nothing else, and I was kind of like, I just kind of sank into my thoughts about feeling like a failure. Everyone else at uni, they were doing it fine. So, why couldn't I cope? Why was I the only one doing this? And I didn't tell my parents I was struggling until the very end of the year. I was quite ashamed, really, of myself and the fact that I couldn't cope, and I was really afraid of being a disappointment. So while all that was happening as well, there was then, but also the second time I went to halls. So both times I've lived in halls, it was really uncomfortable. It was like an assault on my senses. So, I mean, you'll probably know, but the smell of student halls is really distinct. It's unforgettable. Everything is cheap, rough, it's dirty, even when it's clean. The walls are paper thin. I had no noise cancelling headphones or earphones back then. I had nothing to cope with it. I lacked privacy, and my things, food usually was likely to go walkabout. So I also had to be okay with 10 other people in Salford's instance, because there was 11 of us in the house. I had to be okay with their presence the whole time, and any guests they might have. It was odd. It was a really strange experience. There's a lot of good memories too, with, like I said, with those close friends I made, but the sensory overload was constant. And I also didn't know how to relax around so many new people. Trying to be friendly without being too full on. I feel like I've never been great at managing acquaintances. It's like a grey area, are they a friend? Are they not a friend? Who knows? I drank a lot to manage my social anxiety, which then meant I did silly things, and that would cause more anxiety. And I think even when I was surrounded by people, I felt isolated. And on top of that, beside the sensory and social challenges, I also spent much of my undergraduate years in significant pain. I woke up one day at Salford with a sore back, and then that quickly turned into 2 slipped discs, which it took about 5 years for me to recover, a lot of which I spent with a limp because the pain was so bad from the sciatica that my left calf muscle shortened. I just wasn't able to walk properly. And my back was still a massive issue when I started at MMU. I could barely find a comfortable position to study in. It hurt to walk to my lessons. My first Christmas there, I remember being on my own in halls. My other flatmates, they'd already left for the break, and my dad was coming to get me. And it had snowed quite a bit. I remember telling him to make sure that he let me know when he was setting off, because it would take me 45 minutes to get dressed and make it to the gate outside to buzz him in. It was such an undertaking trying to move my body. And now I know, looking back, now I know that those back issues are almost certainly related to the connective tissue disorder, but that's not something that was ever investigated or suggested at the time. So I was just dealing with the fact that I had a sore back rather than linking it to anything else. And I don't think I had any sort of plan in place to manage that. I might be wrong. I might have had something, but I can't remember speaking to anybody about it. It shows how long ago it was, to be honest, that I can't remember.
I mean, it makes you think whether it was so effective that you don't remember it, or whether it just wasn't there.
It definitely wasn't that. I feel like it definitely wasn't effective. I think I just didn't remember it because it was so minimal. But I just I think that one thing that did keep me going through all my time at MMU, because I spent a lot more time there than I did at Salford, and I completed my degrees at MMU. It was the joy that I got from learning, because I feel like I've always been a voracious learner, and I've really threw myself into it in terms of taking in the information and processing it. But creating an output, my assignments was a very different story. I tended to score around 55 to 65, if I remember correctly, on average. Sometimes I did better, sometimes I did worse. And that's really, it's a respectable mark. But the sheer effort that it took to complete my assignments, it was exhausting. I feel like I probably could have come out with a first if I'd known, 1, I was neurodivergent, 2, if I had access to information about support or easy access, I suppose. And 3, if I'd had any reasonable adjustments in place. But these things weren't there. And so, I struggled. Task initiation, that was one thing that I really struggled with. I always found it impossible to get started until days before the deadline. Maintaining focus, I always describe like the thoughts in my brain racing around like the keys in the scene from the first Harry Potter movie. They're all floating about, and then as soon as like Harry Potter tries to grab one, it escapes him and he can't get it. It feels a bit like that. And I knew the mechanics of academic writing. I could express my ideas, but then sometimes I would find that an assignment was too vague and I'd misinterpreted it. But that's something like I didn't know until after I'd handed it in, and then I got a rubbish mark. So I feel like there was a lot of guilt and self-criticism during my time at uni. And I tried to pretend I didn't really care as much as I did, but I really did. I really cared a lot. And I tried really hard, and I still struggled so much. I wrote like 80% of my undergraduate dissertation in the 2 days before I handed it in. That was creative writing, so I guess I could like spin a story if I had to for that long. But then when I did my master's dissertation, it was one of the worst experiences of my life, just trying to get that completed. Even with a 6-month extension to deadline that I got, I still like barely struggled through it. And I know that I'm capable of doing it, but like actually producing it was really hard. And I think about the great examples of student support that I've seen since graduating and while working in higher education. And then I wonder why I didn't know that it was okay to ask for help, or even to just learn in a different way than some of my peers. I feel like it wasn't obvious enough to me, and I didn't know that it was okay.
I mean, and that's fair enough as well. I think the one thing you raised there as well, which honestly I don't think I've spoken about on the show yet, is how students will turn, especially undiagnosed students, will turn to self-medication. Because you mentioned partying, you mentioned drinking, and I don't think we really think about that enough because, they've gone to uni, they're on their own for the first time, they're becoming an adult, they're learning all of this, and it's like maybe they've just found new vices and coping mechanisms for something that's already there. Like, maybe it's just really hard to identify. I think that's another part of the transition to higher education, because you could have a bunch of undiagnosed ADHDers, right, who are struggling in a new environment, have no structure, and all of a sudden have been given things which, with their poor impulse control, they might wish to partake in. It's such a perfect storm, but I don't think we think about how many vices are introduced at the start of university. I think that drinking can be romanticized in a way, like in the old, like academic-y library smoking rooms with a glass of whiskey in, like, I don't know, an ivory tower in Oxbridge or something. Like, and that can be romanticized, but we don't think about partying and everything that can feed into that as well.
I think with ADHD in particular, there's often this sort of risky behavior involved. It's either, risky behavior for chasing dopamine, or it's because, like you say, it's self-medicated. It's trying to dull certain feelings, certain stresses, and it's not just alcohol, and drugs. The sex as well. That's something that a lot of people they don't have access to in the same way until they go to uni. And so there's a lot of self-destructive behaviors that can be going on, especially when you're trying to establish yourself. I don't know if it's changed now, because for me, this was years ago. I started my undergraduate at Man Met in 2010, I think. Yeah, it was 2010. So it's now just over 15 years ago. So I don't know if there's still that relentless sort of focus on bonding through alcohol and other things like that, or if it's changed. It might have changed.
Oh, it's as someone who did York Freshers Week just like in 2019, so just pre-COVID, and also did Oxford rowing. No, it's not changed.
Yeah, I find I'm really affected as well by medication or alcohol. Like, I find it's quite easy for me to get drunk, or I might feel strong effects if I'm taking certain medication for something. So I feel like it was really easy for, for me to have a cheap night out. That was what happened a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I think, so we have the one hand where we have essentially what neurodivergent, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But there's the other hand that I think isn't spoken about much either, where people will just bury themselves in their work because it's where your brain goes to as your default, right? Are you so into your subject and love it, especially at postgrad level, where you will just marry your work and then sometimes that will lead you to ignore other things, or will you go for the partying? And I think there's so many elements to it of where these coping mechanisms can go and how they embody themselves that, I mean, A, it's impossible to catch everyone. I feel like you just got to try and help as many people as you can. But B, it's also when providing the support, where do you even start? Are people neurodivergent? Are they just party animals? Like, are they both? Sometimes it can be really, really, really hard to tell.
Yeah. And sometimes people don't care as much, about what they're doing or what they're studying, especially if they've been sort of pushed into going to uni. And then sometimes people really do care, but they just don't know how to do something, or they don't know how to cope with things. Sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference.
Or with ADHD, where you know what you've got to do, but enacting it is just not working.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess it does feed into the next question. So obviously, you mentioned your ADHD diagnosis, your hypermobility diagnoses are relatively recent. It was end of last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you got your autism diagnosis during your PG cert, right? But I was wondering, so obviously you've now had the experience of 2 degrees with no neurodivergent diagnoses, but you had your autism diagnosis for your PG cert, and I was wondering how or whether your experience of university changed after that diagnosis and whether you encountered any new obstacles or changes as a result.
Yeah, it did change. I think by the time that I got my diagnosis, I had been working in higher education for a couple of years. So I'd returned to the sort of academic environment, and my anxieties and my sensory sensitivities were really severely impacting my day-to-day life. I worked on a circular desk in the middle of the room. And so it was just, I felt constantly alert at all times. And then that's just one example. But then when COVID happened, I found it a bit of a relief, the fact that we came back into the office after the first lockdown and suddenly there was limited space in the library. Everyone had to book. But then on the downside, there was things where we had to enforce COVID restrictions. So we'd find that people who came into the library would push back on those. So the 2-meter distance, silent study in most areas, mask on at all times, unless they were exempt, no food, things like that. And I always hated conflict. And suddenly a massive part of my job was telling people how to behave, which I've never enjoyed doing. My manager was really supportive though. And even without an official medical diagnosis at that point, I was able to get support from the disability support office and access to work. And there was some reasonable adjustments that helped me sort of settle and manage that time in a way that sort of grew my confidence. And I was able to start my teacher training in 21. I had been going through my assessment for autism, and I'd applied to start for the teacher training. It started in September 21. And I was really lucky with that. Like I said, I was able to continue working in the same place, doing my placement like in the academic skills office, and then attending my classes in the same building. So I didn't have to go anywhere or do anything differently for the study, which was great. I don't think I would have made it through my training otherwise. Unfortunately, I did become really overwhelmed in my first semester because I was experiencing that as a student, a teacher, and a librarian at the same time. It was those 3 roles all sort of coinciding. And I also, at that point, decided to come off my anxiety medication. I wanted to see if I could, be without it. And everything just came together. The fact that it was a new semester, I had so much going on, and then I'd come off these anxiety meds. So I took a few months off to recover from burnout. And it was the first time I'd had to take such a big leave of absence, but it was unavoidable. It was really sorely needed. And then 3 days after I went off sick, so I went off sick on the 7th of December, 2021, and I received my confirmation of my diagnosis on the 10th of December, 2021. Yeah. So it was like, I'd just gone off sick and I'd got this diagnosis through. And then I spent that entire break, I call it, but that entire time off trying to understand what it meant and how all of that could be applied to me, just acclimatizing really to the new identity.
Yeah. Because that's the bit that no one prepares you for. It's always, oh, look, you have this diagnosis and you can think about it practically and you can think about it in terms of other things. But I think that there's not, especially in university infrastructure, correct me if I'm wrong, Manchester might have something like cool and amazing and wonderful. There's not really any infrastructure to help what that means for you as yourself and how you deal with potentially the regret that might come from that or other conflicting emotions. And you're just kind of left to process that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what Manchester would have specifically. At the time, I was still at Oldham, so I support things that I might have now, I didn't have then. But what I did do was research. I did a lot of research. And when I got my diagnosis, I was so relieved because it felt like for the first time I could forgive myself for what I'd been through. I'd been holding it against myself for so long that I'd explained it as isolated earlier, but there were times when I just felt slightly separate and different for my entire life, really. And I hadn't really known why. And I seemed to have different ways of thinking about things than a lot of my friends and family. And all these things were coming together and sort of, it felt like there was an explanation for them all. And that was completely and utterly life-changing. I'm still trying to get used to that. So I'm still trying to process it. But I suppose when I was newly diagnosed and I was, studying again and working as well, I did my best at the time. It took me a while before I was comfortable, sort of claiming it and telling people because I didn't really know how to explain it. But then I did, it was only shortly after I got back after my sort of burnout break that I started telling people who I kind of trusted and who I knew it would be okay to tell. I told some of my colleagues, I told some of my peers on the course. Just getting it out there just made it feel more real, and it made me feel like, okay, I don't have to know everything now. I just have to sort of take it one step at a time. And, I was able to adjust it. The support plan I already had, the one that I mentioned I got without the diagnosis, I was able to adjust that now knowing that I had a diagnosis and that there were some other things available to me. So that was great as well. Essentially, a lot of it was taking my time with stuff. And I had one thing on there that was basically if I'm not immediately answering a question, if I seem quiet, I don't really want to be picked on. And that's just such a small thing, but having it written down somewhere, it kind of felt like that might make a difference to the way that I learn, because I'm quite forthcoming in a room of other students. I want to engage, I want to learn, so I want to say stuff. And if I'm not saying stuff, it's because I need to think about it more, or because I'm having a bad day. So either way, I don't really want to talk. I don't really need a lot of coaxing into joining in. It was nice to actually have something like that would really help me. That was when I first got noise cancelling headphones, and I started thinking about loop earplugs and stuff. I could go and sit in an office or sit in a back room once or twice a week, just have that built into my routine at work, so that when I was doing all my teacher training, study and everything, and I was doing my lessons, I could be separate in a quiet place if I needed it. And I often didn't, but just having that there was really useful. I think one of the biggest differences is just knowing. It was just knowing. Like, yes, obviously the adjustments really did help, but just knowing myself, I think my attitude towards myself changed, and that was the greatest thing that made a difference.
Oh, absolutely. It makes the world of difference when you know. I was wondering, so you got your autism diagnosis in December 2021. Were you researching about your condition and about your new autism diagnosis and then going, "Oh, wait, not all of these symptoms align." Is that kind of how you started thinking about maybe I need an ADHD diagnosis, or did that come later?
I was given a questionnaire at the end of my diagnosis when I got my report, and it was like, so many people who are autistic also have ADHD. It's, have a look at this questionnaire. If you think it applies to you, go and get an assessment. If you don't, that's fine, but it's here for you if you want it. And I ignored it at first because I felt like it was a big enough like bombshell to really deal with the autism and like have that as my identity. And so I needed time to process it. But then a couple of years later, as I'm doing more and more research as I'm sort of getting further along, that's when I started thinking, well, as I was learning more, all these co-occurring conditions came up and I started learning more about them. And I think one of the first things I saw that really resonated was, do you know the ADHD iceberg?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So I saw that. I saw an image of that and I was like, oh, there's actually more things to it than I ever knew. And so I sort of tried to educate myself a bit. And then, yeah, that's when I sort of started thinking, hang on a minute, autism doesn't explain all this. Yeah, I think there is something else. So that's when I sort of very slowly decided to pursue that. And then I got a referral through the right to care sort of pathway through the NHS from a GP. And then I started that process early last year. And then I saw someone, I think in September. And then by October, I knew.
Wow, that's pretty fast. Yeah.
I know. I mean, I'd like to say it was a good process, but I actually had an awful experience with the assessment, so much that I had to complain. But I got there eventually.
Oh,
It was horrible. Yeah, I don't think it's unusual either. I think it really depends on the provider you get. And I feel lucky because I think a lot of people, especially, women, they have to do multiple assessments to get there. But I only had to do one. And I actually picked up my first set of ADHD medication today.
wow.
Yes, I haven't tried it yet, but I've just got it. So I'm planning to see if that helps. All these things I've talked about, I'm still struggling with them. I have so many strategies in place, and I have so many things, but essentially, there are things that I can't change about myself, things I wouldn't want to change about myself. But then there are things where I think I do need a little bit of help.
I'm going to have to move on to the next question because we're cut for time, but I have so many questions I'll ask you afterwards about that because I'm currently in the process of retitration. So I feel like we'll have a lot to talk about. But I want to move away from your student stuff because I think we could talk about this for hours. Unfortunately, we only have about 45, 50 minutes. But you work at the library at the University of Manchester now with Kai, as we've learned, guest from a couple of weeks ago. As with Kai's episode, actually, I will link all the previous Manchester people in the description because I feel like I've got a little posse of you now, and I think it's nice to link you all. But what was it like for you, especially now when you had your autism diagnosis and you just finished studying? What was it like transitioning from your studies into a student-facing professional services role?
Actually, I was more student facing, more persistently when I was studying because I was in the library all the time when I wasn't teaching. And so I thought I was pretty much in front of students all week. Whereas when I moved to Manchester, I was only in front of students when I was teaching them. So yeah, that was a huge difference. I didn't have a phone at my new job. And I don't know if you can imagine the kind of relief, but that is like a huge thing, like answering the
Yeah.
phone and transferring calls and all sorts of stuff. It was just something that I hated doing. And so to not have a phone now, I mean, I can be contacted through Teams and things like that and email. It was a really unexpected, pleasant surprise. And so I changed jobs to Manchester, what felt like pretty swiftly for me after I finished study, because I actually had a baby in the middle of all that. So I got pregnant in 22 and I had my son in January 23. So I did a lot of, pre-work in the semester before Christmas because I was trying to sort of get everything done before I had to go off. So then I finished my study. I went back to work after maternity leave and saw a job come up at the University of Manchester. And it just felt like I was just ready for something different. I was ready for a new challenge, ready to do more teaching. I'd got my teaching degree. So I did my interview, I got the job, celebrated. And then I was moving from 30 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour in terms of what I did every day and at the speed of everything. And it was amazing, but it was also a real big change. And I spent the first few weeks in a sort of like happy little daze, kind of realized very early on that people were out, as in people were able to, there were already people who I knew that were in some way neurodivergent, or I knew something else about them, in the first few weeks. And it was really easy to find people who are related to in that sense. I joined the network, the Neurodivergent Staff Network, the Disabled Staff Network, and there's groups on, channels on Teams and stuff and announcements and everything. So it made me feel like I belonged in a way that I'd never really experienced before. This was the first job that I'd ever applied to and told them that I was neurodivergent in the interview, because it'd never come up before. It'd never been something that I thought was applied before. And there was that, when you apply for the job, there's the section that says, do you consider yourself to have a disability? And if you do, there's like a guaranteed interview scheme or something. So I did consider that, but then the way that it was phrased at the time, it didn't quite feel right to agree with the definition that they were giving me. So I hadn't ticked it on my application form. I'd left it off because I felt like I couldn't actually agree with the definition, the way they were phrasing it. And that's been changed now, I think, which is amazing, which is great. But yeah, so I told them in the interview anyway. And it wasn't an issue. I didn't think it was going to be, but you never know if it's the first time you're doing something. And then as soon as I started connecting with DAS, I started connecting with occupational health, things like that. And so I started getting the support that I needed from the get-go.
Yeah, and like there's so much there. Obviously, a lot happened in a very short amount of time. And that sounds like it was very quickly put together as well. But you also discovered a lot of your networks. You said you joined the Manchester Neurodivergent Staff Network very quickly. And I also know that you discovered NLISN or NLISN, which is the Neurodivergent Librarians Network, correct?
Yeah, it's the Neurodivergent Librarian Information Staff Network. Cool. So it's a national network, and I knew nothing about it before I started at Manchester, but very, very quickly I feel like something came up on Teams and I'd spotted a post, and ever since I've found them, essentially, I've stayed with them because my experiences have been so lovely. I went to an event was it last year? Or it could be last year, it could be 2024 actually. So I found in this new job that I could actually go to events. There were a lot of events that I could say I'd like to attend. There's a lot more resources in a bigger institution. And this event came up for NLISN. It was just a day at a university. I think it was in Birmingham. But when I got there, it was like my first experience of being in a room full of neurodivergent people. And it was wonderful. It was also quite overwhelming because I'd never done it before. But I felt like I just knew this is where I needed to be. And the experience was great. There was a lot of things talked about throughout the day. I've kept in touch ever since then. And there was an opportunity to get involved in a buddy scheme from the network, which I did. And I've talked to my buddy a whole lot. And we're actually presenting together a workshop. It's around challenging assumptions about neurodivergence, talking about labels that can be applied and, figuring out, what do we actually believe about ourselves and what other people believe. So we're doing that in July, and yeah, it's fantastic. And I think having this space, having this place to be, it's something I've never experienced before, and I get a lot from the sort of community aspect of it. So I think that has given me the confidence to sort of become a lot more of an advocate for others like me, and anybody who, they don't have to be like me, but just anybody who's a bit different as well. Like I think I'm a much better person, having learned a lot about it and having been through my own struggles. So I'm really grateful for it.
Absolutely. And it actually feeds really nicely into a question I ask all of my guests. No is a valid answer, but you've just said some wonderful things here. And I was wondering if you've experienced any instances of your disability proving helpful in a higher education setting. If you have anything to add, I feel like you've already said some wonderful things.
Thank you. I do think so. I think it's helped me be more curious. It's helped me be more patient. It's helped me be more inclusive. It's helped a lot in terms of developing my own practice. You know, I try and be critically reflective wherever I can on what I do. So if there's something that I see elsewhere that I think would be great to incorporate, then I try and do that. I've also managed to take a few things that I have learned outside of my team and brought them into my team, whether it's just sort of a perspective on a project, whether it's starting a project, you know, personal user manuals, you know, they were raised at the NLISN event that I talked about earlier, and we might be trialing something like that within the team because of that. And it's not just students. I think there's also the people who are behind the scenes, the professional services, the academics. Everybody needs inclusive practice. Everybody needs to be able to do what they're doing in a safe and valued way. And I think that everything I'm learning, everything I'm seeing, I'm trying to apply where possible, just day to day working in the team and sort of growing within the learner developer role as well, because I've not been doing it for that long, but I have scope within this role to follow those passions and follow those interests. And I think there are so many positives. Social justice is quite a big thing, you know, and I think as well, being visible, being somebody who is different in a position of power. I'll talk about a few of these things. There's a case study on the NLISN website that I've written about some of this in, but I think it's important to be obviously yourself and demonstrate to others who may be struggling to come out and talk about things or to ask for help that you actually can, and it will be given. And if anybody needs help, they can come to me and just talk to me about my experience, and I'll try and do my best to help them. There's loads of positives. It's hard when you are struggling and when everything's up and down to see them sometimes, but they're there and they're strong. I wouldn't change most of anything, you know.
Tell you what, I want to ask you more about all of this. I'm aware that we're cut for time. I'm really, we're going to have a chat after this. I'm excited, but we're going to close up the podcast for now. Thank you so much for sharing everything today. We've covered a lot of ground. We've gone from neurodivergent, sex, drugs, and rock and roll all the way to like library administrative services. It's been a very, very wide berth of an episode. I've enjoyed it. It's been good fun.
Oh, well, thank you. And I feel like, you know, that I probably could have talked for a lot longer on a lot of this, and I probably would have if you hadn't kept me to time. But you know, there's always room for another story, another day, in another way. So
absolutely, more Manchester people. But anyway, I was wondering if we try and cover everything that we've spoken about today and we condense it down maybe into 1 or 2 sentences, keep it a bit brief. What is one key takeaway that you would like listeners to remember from your story?
Whoever you are, whether you're a student, a staff member, or anybody else related to higher education, it is absolutely fine to be yourself. And, you know, you are welcome. You know, we want you there. And we also want to help you, even if you're not anywhere near Manchester. There'll be somebody somewhere who does want to help you. So if something's not working, then it doesn't mean that you failed. It just means you need something different.
Absolutely. And We will leave it there for now. I'm going to do my little spiel and we'll close up the show. Thank you so much. So, HE Enabled is the show all about sharing our experiences of disability, neurodivergence, and long-term health conditions in UK higher education. If you are listening to this episode before the 24th of May, congratulations, you are a patron. If you wish to receive some early episodes, you can join the Patreon. It's £1 a month. Gonna try and stick in some photography in there. Gonna put in some early episodes as and when I can. If you would prefer to make a donation to the show that isn't a £1 monthly commitment, I understand. You can also buy me a coffee. Both of those links are in the episode description. Other than that, I'm looking for guests. If you want to come on the show, drop me a message. There is a link tree in the show description. Come say hi. But other than that, I think we are done. Sarah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. It was nice to get it all out and say stuff,